Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Election Forum. My name is Jennifer Bergeron, and with me is Naomi Nairman. We are both members of the Election Committee and will be moderating the forum this evening. The candidates are in alphabetical order: Arthur Alexander, Jeff Blander, and Susan Faddick. All three are here on the Zoom. The Election Committee received a large number of questions in advance from our engaged residents to ask the candidates this evening. And thanks to all the residents who sent in the questions. You can also, this evening, give the moderator some questions for the candidates during the forum by using the chat function on the Zoom this evening. The format for tonight is as follows. We'll begin with a 2-minute opening statement from each candidate and then go to the residents' questions. Each candidate will have an equal amount of time to answer each question. We'll also rotate the sequence in which the candidates are asked the questions in order to maintain fairness. At the end of the forum, each candidate will then have 2 minutes for a closing statement. So, without further ado, I'd like us to start with the opening statement from Arthur Alexander.
Well, thank you. This is not my first time at the forum. Olden times, we used to meet in the village office with coffee and pastries on a Saturday morning. Those times are past. But what I would like to point out is that I think what I have going for me this time is experience as treasurer, experience just sitting here listening to all the issues and problems and debates that come before the council, experience in dealing with our various contractors, with the county, with the state, and finally, I think absorbing some knowledge and background in just how things operate in a small municipality. I think as being chair, I have had the opportunity to move through a few contentious issues. We've put those behind us, and I hope that it's all smooth sailing from now on. And I'm looking forward to spending another 2 years on the council. So thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Can we now hear from Jeff Blander?
Delighted, and thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here, and it's always a privilege. I've always enjoyed these forums and grateful to participate. Also want to thank the committee, knowing all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes that perhaps not everyone knows or appreciates on the day-to-day and what it takes to get to this point. So again, kudos to all you for the hard work. Also, my fellow council members, this is really, I wouldn't say unusual, but we have an uncontested year. And so really looking forward to this conversation with Susan and Arthur, who I admire a great deal. They bring an awful lot of experience, and they've each, Arthur currently is chair and Susan has been chair. I've learned a lot. I think we, while there's been points where perhaps we haven't always agreed, I would believe if we were to actually do the bean counting on our votes, that a significant amount of those votes we've aligned unanimously. And that's where really I believe, everyone here, despite some differences on certain things, we all do what we feel is in the best interests of our residents and village. And I want to just share, from my perspective, I always feel that I have been someone who's listened very carefully and learned from our magnificent residents who have so much experience, whether safety or, water or all sorts of things that are most critical to them. And I'm really looking forward to tonight's discussion, not only to talk about the questions that our residents have submitted, but each of us in our views collectively, or perhaps some differences in terms of where we're going forward, which is based upon a very strong fiscal management. And also, again, really being very, very focused on resident priorities. And with that, let me turn back over to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, Thank you, Jeff, very much. Can I now turn to Susan Faddick?
Good evening, VMA residents. Thanks to those of you who are here in person tonight, as well as those who are listening to the audio after the fact. And thanks very much to the election committee for organizing the forum. As you probably know by now, I'm Susan Faddick. It's been my privilege to serve on the VMA Council since 2015. And in those 8.5 years, I brought my Midwestern sensibility, my law degree, and my decades of legal and nonprofit board experience to bear on issues of good governance and municipal administration in Martin's Addition. During my tenure, the council has worked together effectively, to Jeff's point and to Arthur's point, accomplishing many significant projects, including streetlights, leaf vacuuming, composting, and several traffic calming measures, including speed humps. The Brookville sidewalk replacement is finally well underway, and we're very eager for that to be completed with prudent oversight. As both of my colleagues have mentioned, we have a very strong financial position. While we've accomplished a great deal over the last years, there are several critical issues which continue to impact the quality of life in our village. Most urgently, we need to implement the remainder of the recommendations proposed by the Walkability Task Force in 2021, including better enforcement of traffic laws and installation of curb extensions to reduce traffic on the cut-through streets. Curb extensions that have been delayed due to necessary infrastructure measures should be achievable in the near term, and that will benefit everyone. Stormwater control, a problem that will eventually impact many, if not most, VMA households if left unchecked, is being studied by the Storm and Groundwater Task Force, aka the Water Task Force, which was appointed by the council last year. Working in consultation with an experienced engineer, the task force has already made great progress, and I will continue later.
Thanks very much, Susan.
Thank you.
Let me turn it over to Naomi now.
So I'm happy to report that we received as many as 33 questions from VMA residents thus far. Others might come through the chat this evening. Many of the questions were redundant, or there was quite a bit of overlap. So we've turned these 33 questions into 15 that fall into 4 categories: the candidate's background and past contributions, the infrastructure and water issues, the ethics committee, and then finally, what the candidates see as future issues that should be part of our vision going forward. So I'll start with the background and past contributions that each of the candidates have made. Some of you have already mentioned them, so you could skip over that. But the specific questions from the residents are as follows. How many years have you served in the council? And why are you interested in serving again? What are your particular strengths? What changes in service delivery, reporting, and accountability have you introduced in the Village of Martin's Additions? And what do you consider your most important contributions to the council and to the village as a whole? So having started with Arthur beforehand, we will now start with Jeff. 2 minutes for your answer.
Excellent. Well, that's quite a litany, and I will do my best in short order. But again, it's been a privilege to serve. It's going on my 4th year, my 2nd term, and I am seeking re-election for my 3rd. So in that time, it in some ways, and I say it with great love to our community and council, it can be like dog years. So 4 can feel like 40 in some ways. You know, we do have things that we align on and other things that we go through some periods of contention, but all of it is a blessing to me. And for me personally, it's always a decision where I weigh the factors of my family. I reach out to fellow residents. I even get a litmus of some members of the council. But at the end of the day, it's what's in my heart. And I love our community. I expect our family to be here for a long time to come. And I feel that I add value. You know, this isn't about the idea of just throwing it in because I've been elected before and I have experience. I've spent this year first time as treasurer. I think I've added significant value in terms of upgrading and providing specificity to our reporting financially, what we disclose in our meeting packets. I also, as you know, in the last council meeting, introduced some best practices and what I hope to see that we adopt as a unanimous as our council for the next council, how we introduce and look to adopt any new legislation or regulation or policy that involves our residents and understanding the problems and a very clear input for them to be part of the process. And in terms of my most important contributions, you know, I say it out of humility because this is not an individual type of thing. I'm getting yanked, but just say that I'm proud of the Water Task Force and some of the committees that we've stood up together, and we'll talk more about that. I defer back to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, next is Susan, please.
Hi. Well, I have actually served on the council, as I mentioned, for 8.5 years. And during that time, a number of service upgrades have been introduced, including, as I said, better streetlights, which have drastically reduced our electric bills while providing better lighting, leaf vacuuming, composting, the speed humps, which have served to slow somewhat the traffic on Cummings and Shepherd and other streets, although we need to do more. I think those are probably some of the best tangible takeaways from my time on the council. There have been a number of improvements through ordinances that have tended to instill a better good governance provisions, we'll say. I'm very anxious to continue to work on the walkability issues, as well as seeing what the Stormwater Task Force will do. They're already off to a great start, and we're really looking forward to working with them. So I'm sure stormwater will come up again and we can talk about it later. Thanks.
Thank you. And next is Arthur.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I've been on the council, I think it's been 14 years now. And if reelected, will be 16. During that period, I've been chair once and then again, so twice, treasurer. I was chair of the tree committee that introduced the idea of planting or facilitating planting of trees on private property. And we've done over 100 trees. That's a small forest of large trees that we've planted. I think my strength has been analytical capacity. That's what my whole career has been in economic analysis, but more broadly, policy analysis. To go through the complicated issues that come before us, it's not just week after week or year after year, but day after day. And to deal with that in an disimpassioned way, to go through the problems, the solutions. And I think that experience then adds to what I bring to the table, which is a whole lot of time dealing with a whole lot of stuff, just day after day, just the stuff that comes before the village. And what I realize that it takes that kind of attention just to keep things going smoothly. It's nothing big, it's nothing heroic. It's just the daily activities. And following what Susan said, I think that in specific areas, the walkability, which I agree with Susan, we should continue working on, water and trees. These are the hot issues today, and they've been with us for quite a while. Other than that, as I said, it takes more than a village to keep the village going. It keeps constant attention and focus. The manager is there doing the day-to-day things, but it takes the council to provide the strategic direction. So that's what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna turn now to the safety and infrastructure questions. The first one is as follows. The Brookville Road traffic burden has only worsened in recent years. Beyond the council's ongoing effort to widen adjacent sidewalks, would you support further council action to devote already budgeted police funds to actively enforce Brookville Road traffic speeds, stop signs, and vehicular weight limits? Would you also support efforts to pursue remedial measures in coordination, but not passive deference to the state of Maryland, such as additional stop signs, stricter vehicle weight limits, a reduced speed limit, and rush hour cut-through restrictions? I'm going to start this question with Susan Fadig, please.
That would be an unequivocal yes. I think we need to do those things. Some are easier to accomplish than others, however, including the police assignment or delegation for enforcement. But I think that we have to take better measures because it really is an existential issue for our village. Just crossing Brookville at the Raymond intersection, even on off hours, is sometimes taking your life in your hands, as cars often speed to get through that intersection before the pedestrian can actually set foot in the intersection. So we definitely have to really pursue all of those measures very aggressively.
Thank you. Can I turn to Arthur next?
Okay. This has been an ongoing problem ever since I've been on the council, and probably a long time before. And the reason it's such a challenge is that Brookville Road is a state highway, and the village does not have jurisdiction over it. We can, even putting in the sidewalks has required a great deal of coordination and working with the state, and has taken years to do. You may recall when the village of Chevy Chase, just south of us, put in the sidewalks on Village, it took well over 20 years to accomplish that. So having said that, and recognizing we really don't have authority over the roadway itself, what we are looking into is to working with the state and particularly the highway, who does the policing there. We cannot put in our own police. We just do not have the authority to do that. But what we can do, what has been suggested, is that we get the county, if they're not going to do regular policing of it, to do sporadic periods, like a week of enforcement, with the objective of that you get pulled over once or twice for speeding through or for going through the stop sign. For the next several weeks and months, you'll be doing it more carefully. We once asked our two policemen to look into this, and it turns out that given the formulas that the state uses, we are way, way down on any priority for doing things. When you look at the number of vehicles, the speed of vehicles, the number of school kids walking along the road, it places this stretch of Brookville Road way down in any priority list. And so recognizing that, I think we have to work with the county to come in and do special weeks of enforcement, and perhaps they'll have longer term impacts.
Thank you. Can I turn now to Jeff?
Thank you, and I want to thank the residents who posed such an incredibly essential question to us, because I think traffic safety, walkability, and then the separate issue of our policing and feeling safe within our village are so critical to what we do. First, to answer the question directly, I think we need to separate the area of enforcement and policy to address safety and perhaps policing from the budget. I don't believe we need to say that we have to take budget from one for the other, because we're not in a budget crunch. I think this is more about enforcement and looking at these separately. as folks know, in the past year, I actually was hit by a slow-moving car on the outlet from our commercial strip onto Turner. And I believe we don't need any more surveys or studies. And I think that there are some things we can do, whether it's arms that you need to pause before you enter onto our streets, which we do have domain on. I also believe, frankly, that's the signs, and this is something I've advocated for years, are not necessarily as clear as they could be where they are just a few blocks ahead in other jurisdictions where it says it's a state law that you need to stop at this crosswalk. We don't have that there. And I think there's confusion. You see cars trying to jut through while folks are trying to walk through. So I think there are things around enforcement. I agree with Arthur, there are, and Susan, there are complexities, but look, I work for the State Department, one of the biggest bureaucracies in the world. And if I woke up every morning saying all the things I can't do because of who's telling me or what I can't do, I wouldn't get out of the house in the morning. So I think there are things we can do. I don't think that we have to wait for others. And that's the beauty of VMA as a special tax district, is we can do things and move forward. Do I have any time or should I defer? I'll talk about policing perhaps down the road at another time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So building off of the discussion we just had, would you be willing for the village to purchase a right-of-way or easement to the side of a resident's property to allow a long-term and safer passageway for pedestrians to walk from their homes to other destinations in the village without going on Brookville Road? Assuming that residents were willing to sell such a right-of-way or easement to the village, would you be willing for the village to purchase this to improve walkability for residents? So I'd like to turn to Arthur first.
Yeah, this is a great idea. Some people have pointed out that there have been a number of paths that were semi-official paths that have closed down over the years. We don't know whether those paths were on easements. I think it would be useful to look into that to see whether we could purchase it, whether they already exist. It would take going through the property records, going through the deeds to do that. But the idea of reincarnating some of the old paths that the kids used to use coming home from school, and that I was taken through by some kids at the end of our block, going through under the hedges and under the trees. I said, how long have you been doing that? I said, well, we always have been doing it, but they don't do that anymore. That's been closed down. These paths in the back streets would go a long way if it were feasible. I'm not sure it is. I would certainly support looking into that.
Thank you. Can I turn to Jeff now?
Absolutely. Well, first, and again, I'm not sure if any of this is, I wouldn't call contract sensitive, but I know that our manager is working extremely hard currently on the shovel-ready projects on Brookville. And I know that part of those discussions, there is some outreach to specific residents about, as this is being done. I think there may be a couple places where there may be, again, some discussion or negotiation. So I do know that there is a flavor for this, but as Arthur and Susan have discussed and mentioned, these are very complex. And, we all agree, private ownership and private property, that's one of the cornerstones and lifebloods, not only of VMA, but, just in the country that we are. So I think we have to be very delicate. Of course, I'd be for the idea, but the residents would have to be also behind it, and it isn't something that we would force on them. So, thanks. I'll defer my.
Thank you. Can I turn to Susan next?
I would agree that it would bear looking into. I'd caution that there could be ADA compliance issues. Just off the top of my head, that's something that might be a concern. But certainly it doesn't hurt to look into it. And I, like Arthur, remember those hidden pathways to Shepherd Park. And they were a great shortcut. So
thank you. Okay. So what 3 preemptive steps would you take to ensure that new construction does not cause infrastructure problems in the future? Can I start with Jeff on this question, please?
Absolutely. So this is obviously a very sensitive topic, and something that our residents fully expect us as a council, I believe, to ensure that we are on their side when it comes to a number of things. First of all, new development and new construction. We've had some very painful sessions this year where developers have come in, and I think in many ways have showed us we've had to change our code based upon what we had seen around stormwater management and planter boxes. So one, I think it's really important that we look at our code on an enforcement level to ensure that we are enforcing our code in a way that protects our residents. I also very strongly believe, and we've seen examples this year where we've modified our code, where we've seen where developers have also then gone and stretched boundaries that were really gray areas for us. We've learned it's been painful, and we've changed the code, and so we need to be on top of that and perhaps bring in more legal consult to address what we don't see now, because this is a whack-a-mole. And I think the final piece of this, which is so important, if we look back to the original there were studies done years ago around the character and nature of our village, and lots of around the building code. I think that we do have to look at enforcement around the idea of the calculations that we use for the footprints, and ensure, again, enforceability, but what may come down the road in terms of how developers may get around those calculations. And with that, I defer back to the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. May I turn to Susan next, please?
Again, I would agree in large part with Jeff's response, although I think that we will need to look a little more aggressively, perhaps, toward amending our code in a way that will address stormwater runoff in the future. It's going to be a major problem if we don't. And we've already seen some of the pitfalls, to use a very bad pun, but unintentional. But I think that we need to take a strong look, a very critical look at our building code.
Thank you, Susan. May I turn to Arthur, please?
Yeah, the word infrastructure was used, the impact on infrastructure without definition. I presume that really is referring to water issues, where we have a water committee looking right now. And even before the water committee started, informally started looking at revising the building codes, looking at the scale of current structures and the area of the impermeable surfaces. So this seems to be, as buildings and houses are getting larger, more of the water is flowing off the impermeable surfaces, the roofs, the driveways, the patios, onto the remaining soil that's left, and it can't handle it. And so this is where the builders are being forced to put in various kinds of structures to deal with the water. At the same time, they're bulldozing the trees, they're clear cutting the trees off the lot, which are great water retainers, and we just don't have control over that. All of that is under county control, under the water management. What we could do, as Susan and Jeff had noted, we can begin to look back at our own building codes, not controlling the water, but controlling scale. Now, we have to recognize that when we say controlling scale, this really means smaller structures. And developers are going to look at that and say, smaller structures mean lower prices. They sell by the square foot. I think it enhances the value of the community overall, even if we require smaller structures and more permeable surfaces, more soil, more grass, more trees. We enhance the whole value of the community, but this is going to be an argument that we will hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question in this section. What progress has the Water Task Force made thus far? And how do you see its role in preventing water problems in the future? So I'd like to start with Susan on this question, please.
I think, like walkability, they have the potential to outline a number of proactive steps that we can take as a village to address a very serious problem. I think they've already made great headway in identifying an engineer, in holding a public hearing, and in moving toward applying for a grant and setting in place the structure to begin work at actually getting something going on stormwater and groundwater management. I expect great things from them. I think they're already off to an amazing start. So with walkability as a sort of template, or as an indication of what can be accomplished by a task force, I look for great things from them.
Okay, thank you. Can I turn to Arthur next, please?
Yeah, funny you ask about that. I was just about to write up a little paragraph for the next village weekend report on this. The committee is about to, or is preparing a questionnaire, a survey for the residents. It's vital that everybody respond to that so we get a better idea of what the problems are in quite a lot of detail. They have applied for a grant from the state for $80,000 to finance engineering studies. And if they don't get that, they have come to the council asking if we could provide funds either in lieu of state funds or until state funds arise. I think that's a big enough problem, and the need is so clear that I completely support that we provide funds to get this study going. The other things that they are doing is looking at our neighboring communities. We're not the only ones to have these problems. The town of Somerset has tried to take water retention on properties during construction under their own control. They have taken this away from the county, and they are finding serious challenges in dealing with it. The county has a whole infrastructure set up to deal with that. This is probably not something that we want to do, but by putting in better constraints on what is built, I think we can deal with a lot of the issues that arise. Dealing with sewers is another problem. The WSSC, who runs the sewer, says they don't have the money to improve the overburdened sewers. We could put some of our money into that. They would welcome it. It's not sure right now if until we get engineering studies whether that would be the wise way to go, but that's another area that's being looked into.
Thank you, Arthur. Can I turn to Jeff, please?
Thank you. And of course, having the opportunity after Arthur and Susan, I can fill in maybe some pieces. I agree, pretty much with what they've shared. This task force, so germane to the critical near-term as well as longer-term issues of our village, and really are doing some essential work. I had sat down with Jean and Mark, who are co-leading that task force from the resident side, and with our manager, Michael, to go through the very minutia of the mechanisms of how we can fund their surveys and studies and recognizing they have applied for that grant and being rest assured that that there will be funding available, whether it's through an ARPA or through our reserves. And of course, it needs to be voted on by the rest of the council. But as you can see from my two other council members and in prior discussions, we have a pretty significant agreement on the critical nature. And then there'll be, you know, the minutia of exactly not only the study, but most importantly, the implementation. And what are we going to be doing to focus on, for example, the details of sump pumps and how that water flow may be going into the right of way and how we're going to address that. And finally, if I have just a moment, you know, I think we saw this year where VMA plays such an incredible role when it comes to coordination and how we can protect and safeguard our village and residents by working with the county on how we can move the dial so that when there are new constructions, you know, we can negotiate various things so that there will be proper discharge or connectivity, where if you didn't have VMA as that negotiator and you left it relying on the county, you may not see movement ever, and it may get down to a litigious area. So I'm very grateful to live in this village where we know that we have a council and a management office that's on the side of the residents to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
So the next category of questions has to do with the Ethics Committee. So the first question that has been posed is, could each of you explain to the village your personal motivations in voting for or against the ordinances and its extension? Why does the village need these measures despite the absence of a single ethical violation throughout its history and despite a strong majority of residents opposing it in surveys and statements before the council? So I'll turn to Susan. Was it? No,
I think it's Arthur.
Arthur.
Okay,
Let's turn to Arthur to answer that question to start with.
No,
okay, I
no,
think I'm a good choice to start because I voted both for and against it. And I can tell you why. First, the premise of the question is wrong. There have been ethics complaints brought. In fact, one was brought against me 12 years ago. So there have been ethics complaints made. In the latest rendition of the ethics ordinance, I first did not approve it because I thought it was a lot of machinery for, as was suggested, very few issues that arose and that the council could take care of it itself. But I was overridden on that. The ordinance was passed. And then I saw that the ordinance itself introduced a whole structure for dealing with it, a due process regulations, confidentiality requirements. There was a structure there. And I thought that that structure could then be applied without any new additional machinery to all committee members, not just the so-called statutory committees that are established by the charter. And I thought that if there was nothing that keeps a complaint from any committee member, so I thought if a complaint arises, why not use the established structure of due process and confidentiality, the mechanisms that already have been established to deal with everybody, rather than have two different processes dealing with different committee members. And I did it in opposition to, as you noted, a great deal of community opposition. First, because I thought the opposition was based on incorrect information, the logic was bad, and the facts were wrong.
Turn to Jeff, please.
Thank you, and I greatly appreciate the question. I know that this has been a raw nerve for our community. And I just want to share, I think it's fairly obvious that my views on this are very different than Arthur and Susan, but I also want to share, as I said in my opening remarks, I respect them and I know what they do and how they vote on things they feel is in the best interests of our community. Now, with that said, I feel that this is a tourniquet for a paper cut. That we had, things in place that the council can do. You can dismiss or ask any volunteer to leave if needed. In terms of council members, we have things called elections, and there's also the ability for a recall. And then when it comes to staff, we have various at will and other laws in place, both at the state and county levels, that address these things. So really, it comes down to me, does this really fit our community of 300 or so households and 1,000 residents? And again, I feel that it's unnecessary. But really, the other issue that if there is a silver lining from this, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't able to advocate for the indemnity expansion to include ethics in our code, so that if there is an ethics violation brought and it's turned out to be false, then we can get reimbursement for our legal fees. And I think that's really important. And I also think out of this, the process by which we started this year, where we didn't have any explanation and we didn't have any a forum with the community. It was just introduced within 1 day before that vote was taken, and I was traveling. I think this will be the silver lining of how we go forward, of doing new regulations and policies going forward. Thank you, and I defer back to the committee.
Susan, your turn.
Yes, thanks. I supported the ethics ordinance, as you all know, during my tenure as chair, because I knew that it was necessary. I had actually seen a complaint filed, and I knew that the procedure that was outlined in our then existing code was much harsher in many ways and didn't provide the due process and confidentiality provisions that the version we actually ended up adopting does provide. It's really in the best interest of anyone who is subject to an ethics complaint. And ethics bodies are just good governance. As a lawyer, I support that. As a lawyer, I supported the due process and confidentiality provisions. And like Arthur, I didn't wholeheartedly accept the results of the allegedly strong survey results supporting ethics, because as we all know, surveys can be skewed to derive the answers that are desired. And so for that reason, I would support and have discussed with Michael a bit off topic here, the possibility of having a professional survey drawn up for our next round in the fall, so that we can actually have some objective results and really tap into what our residents really want. Not only on this, hopefully this one is decided and is kind of a dead issue at this point, but in terms of other priorities for residents, I think we really all deserve a very objective survey. So I support that. Professional survey.
So another question about the ethics committee. What assures us that the members of the ethics committee are unbiased investigators and adjudicators? While the ethics committee members are required to recuse themselves from investigating in which a member has a personal interest, there seems to be no mechanism to enforce that obligation. And the requirement for recusal is too narrow, since the ordinance does not mention personal friendships or political alliances as a basis for requiring recusal. Would you support strengthening the recusal provisions of the ethics ordinance to enhance its fairness? So this time we would start with Susan. I think was it, or was it Jeff? Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Is it okay if it's truly mine? Would I support strengthening the recusal provisions? No. I think if our Supreme Court doesn't have to recuse themselves, actually, in all seriousness, when the council selects members for the ethics committee, we choose members of the community who are known to be unbiased. And I think that if we start excluding anyone who's a friend, then we are trying to find the least popular member of our community to serve on the ethics committee. Like, we can't expect people not to have friendships, and we can't expect them to be biased in every instance. I think that's just not, it's not fair at all to the members of the committee.
Thank you.
Shocking.
Arthur, would you
Yeah,
weigh in on this?
This is the old question of kind of who watches the watchdog or who polices the police. I can't quite remember what that cliche is. But complaints can be brought against ethics committee members by members of the public for being for not being impartial, for being partial. That could be a legitimate complaint that could be brought. If that's the case, then there are procedures set up for, like, who deals with the ethics committee. It would be the council. Committee members can be dismissed if it's obvious to council that they are operating in an inappropriate manner. So I think we do have recourse here. It's not like loose cannons or some other cliche. So I don't see this as an issue. I see that there are remedies through the complaint process, through the dismissal process, through the council looking into it. So it's a theoretical problem that I don't see that's unsolvable.
Jeff?
Well, this is a great question, and you can see the differences in opinions, though I respect my fellow council members. Absolutely. I mean, this is where the wheels fall off the bus, and to try and it's just implausible, this mechanism and apparatus to have fellow residents. And again, we don't have formal training standards, and I'm glad Susan brought up the Supreme Court as an example. If the Supreme Court had our ethics standards, I think they'd have a lot of recusals. We've had a council member who had to recuse themselves on a permitting process because I believe there was some babysitting activity going on, completely unrelated. So I believe that, as I've said, this is a tourniquet for a paper cut. And I've also said that I think what we need is anyone who is accused of an ethics violation, they should have the ability to go to a third-party independent reviewer and not judged by fellow residents. And I think that's important. And all I have to say is thank goodness for that indemnity clause, because I think if anyone is ever accused and there at least is that protection and reimbursement for the legal fees if this ever does arise because of the flaws in not having appropriate recusal processes. Thanks. Over to the committee.
Final question under the ethics committee category. It appears that the ethics ordinance can be held entirely in secret under an exception to the Maryland Open Meetings Act. The entire proceedings will not be known to other residents of the village. Instead, the entire process of investigation and adjudication is done in secret. There is thus no need for consistency between cases or fairness in each case. Why is this an appropriate process for ensuring unbiasedness in village affairs? A resident question. So we will start this time with Jeff.
Thanks. And that, this gets into the complexities and minutia of the mechanics. And quite frankly, I learned a long time ago, I grew up and was raised by my grandmother where, she taught me about kindness and listening, and in a neighborhood that reminds me so much of VMA today. And quite frankly, if you have the litmus test of you can't explain it to your grandmother, you've got to kind of rethink it. And this is one of those areas. And so all I have to say is I don't really have a good answer in that I don't completely understand it. And like I say, I'm glad there's an indemnity clause because I probably wouldn't be here if there wasn't. But I do believe in confidentiality of complaints, because I've seen complaints that for the first time in several years that were redacted, that quite frankly were based upon information that I believe was misinformed. And so I think it's really important that the accused and the accuser, there is some confidentiality until there's a real understanding of what these things are, but also it just gets to the mechanics of really you need a third party and this shouldn't be managed or run by residents. So with that said, I do refer my time back to the committee. Thanks.
I'll call on Susan next.
As far as some disconnect apparently between the Open Meetings Act and the confidentiality of the complaints is what I take the thrust of the question to be. It's because this would be an exception to the Open Meetings Act, as it would involve personnel.
Thank you. Arthur?
Yeah, in addition to what Susan just said, I think the question misperceives the process. The secrecy here is to preserve the privacy of the individual, particularly in the early stages of a complaint, where it may be that there really is no grounds for a complaint. So rather than publicly have a hearing about a particular person who's named, where the complaint is made public, where it turns out that there's no grounds for a complaint there at all, in the fact-finding portion of the proceedings, this is a means to preserve privacy and not to expose people to unnecessary public scrutiny when it doesn't exist. And as Susan notes, the Public Meetings Act explicitly allows for personnel discussions of this type. For example, one example is when we discuss the manager's salary, we go into closed hearings. When we discuss personnel issues, we go into closed hearings, and there is a specific form that we fill out that the law allows that. So I think the question is one that misperceives the process. It's not a totally secret activity. In general, the Ethics Committee operates in the open, and it's only when hearing the specific facts and details in a case that it becomes secret. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to turn to future issues next. And so I want to start with the question as follows. What are the top 3 issues or complaints that you hear? And I'd like to start with Susan first, please.
I actually don't hear a lot of complaints aside from the things we've already discussed. The traffic issues, especially Brookville, infrastructure or stormwater. A lot of people have complained about runoff and concerns about their yards eroding with heavier rainfalls and things. There in the past had been complaints about lack of civility among some residents, and I think that has really been ameliorated by a return to normal activities following the pandemic. I think much of the lack of civility was really occasioned by the COVID quarantines and people being very frustrated, as governing bodies across the country discovered. People really took out their frustrations and anger on Zoom meetings, and luckily we've sort of returned to regular order now.
Thank you. Can I turn to Arthur, please?
Yeah, in terms of complaints that we hear, one is the scale of new structures going up, new houses that are being built to the maximum that the current building code allows. Not only are they big, at times it looks like a cruise ship pulling them next to a dock when a new house goes up, and people just are not used to that kind of a scale. But it also seems to be contributing to the water problems. As I mentioned, the bigger the roof, the bigger the porch, the bigger the patio, the bigger the driveway, the less area there is for water to percolate down and through the soil. And so that's one issue. Another is parking enforcement. And let me say, this is one of the most frustrating areas we have to deal with. We have parking regulations. There is very little we can do about parking. And here I will look to residents for suggestions. The county police doesn't want to do it. Our police that we hire don't want to do it. The lawyer, our legal counsel, doesn't want to get involved in enforcing parking tickets. It means spending a day unscheduled in traffic court where you don't know when you're going to be heard. I've looked for private organizations that could do this. I've turned to mayors of towns around us looking for advice from them, and they said they had no advice for me. Good luck. One of the things that we could possibly do is to write not tickets but warnings. Just say you are parked illegally. Don't do this. But that has no enforcement quality. It would be mainly educational. And then the traffic issues, the through traffic on our own streets, the traffic on Brookville. We have tried with the speed bumps to stop that, and we are now looking at some of the other things that were suggested in walkability. Go ahead.
Thank you.
All done.
Can I turn to Jeff, please?
Thank you so much. And, why don't I start? There's a quote which I love to use, and it's by Maya Angelou. And paraphrasing her, she would say, people forget what you say, but you'll remember how you make them feel. And I think that the times when I've had complaints other than the technical pieces of safety and traffic, it's when they feel, or residents feel, that their council is not responsive to them. And I think that, again, we've already talked about this. I think ethics has brought that up. I also believe some of our permitting processes have brought that up, where the council has had the ability to vote in favor of residents, and those votes didn't always go their way. I know they're not here, and I don't know if I'm breaking protocol, but Doug and Hiromi, who I've learned an awful lot through their ordeal, their grace and what they brought to the table and their professionalism. And so I believe that those are the things that elevate to the level where when residents truly don't feel the council has been on their side or listening. With that said, our village manager, Michael, is I don't even have the words to describe. I mean, on the daily basis, he gets the complaints, and he'll get complaints on things like a leaf bag or, so there is a cacophony of complaints that come in, and our village staff handle those magnificently. And again, the issues we'll talk about, water and public safety and things as issues probably in our closing statement. But when I get things where people are really feeling concerned, it's when they felt that there are things, policies, or even the survey, for example, where resident input was not welcomed. Even I had felt that, where my own input was not welcomed on certain parts of the survey for adding items. that is where I typically get when folks will call me up or text me and feeling that they would like us to be more responsive. Thank you. Back over to the committee.
Thank you. So next question, based on your past experience on the VMA Council, what is your assessment of current community involvement in local government decision-making? And what would you do or change to encourage greater participation? So I'm gonna start this question with Arthur, please.
Yeah, that is a question we've been dealing with over the years. Sometimes we get too much feedback. Susan alluded to the meetings at the beginning of the pandemic where we had 80 people signed up for a meeting. Back in the old days, we used to get 4, 5, 6 people sitting around, and busy day 20. And people were very excited. So I don't think I want that. But one of the things that has been suggested over and over, and we just can't figure out how to do it, is some kind of a community listserv. There are legal constraints on the village doing it. The one that exists is almost defunct. It's kind of running on fumes at the moment. And I would like to see another one take its place that we could support, that would be a great place for people to talk, to discuss, to suggest, to complain. And right now we don't have that. So I look forward to doing something. I've looked at what the other communities around us are doing, and they have run into some of the same issues. They have listservs that are not run by the council, by the village, but by volunteers. There are ideas for more information in our weekly and monthly report, the Martin's edition. And I think Michael is doing some of that. And then people can just call up, email, and stop us in the street. I think that's a great way for things to happen, and in fact does happen. And I welcome those opportunities. Don't fear making a phone call. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Can I turn to Jeff, please?
Absolutely. And could I ask, could you just repeat the question once more? That would be great. Thank you.
Yep. Based on your past experience on the VMA Council, what is your assessment of current community involvement in local government decision-making? And what would you do or change to encourage greater participation?
Fabulous question. Now, look, I believe that we can always do better. And I also know that if you compare the litmus to other municipalities or even larger bodies like Gaithersburg or Montgomery Village, we actually do in some ways a lot more than others. But with that said, I've seen, I think, a lot of improvements over the years since I've been on the council. I've advocated for forums. I don't believe you can ever have too much. I welcome it. Now you have to look at the cadence of the annual calendar and see when you can do a forum, when is there too much. I also want to balance this as me being, being treasurer this year. We held an open working session for the budget, which is really the cornerstone of our, village in terms of programming and implementing various topics of concern. We had 2 residents who came to that discussion, one in person and one online. So, I think we have to also kind of balance with what seems like the archetype of saying we need to do more, but also recognize that, a lot of folks are very busy, and, that we have to also just see what is the right mix. Because again, if we were to go to perhaps Kensington, which I know some people who are here attending today who've shared with me what they do, they have many people, many dozens who show up for their budget versus 2 for us. So I think we need to balance what we could do better, but also where and what is too much.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Susan now, please.
Yeah, I think I would pick up on Jeff's point about engagement being a function of how busy people are. I think we need to recognize that People aren't necessarily disengaged. They may be overly engaged elsewhere. I would certainly encourage more residents to join committees. They don't necessarily require a lot of time. And just by having another view into government, they can impact and engage with the council in that manner.
Thank you. Next question. If you could wave a magic wand, what services in the village would you improve? How and why? Jeff, can we start with you, please?
Wow, what a great question.
Mhm.
I don't have my magic wand, but I see literally this is I see my daughter's for one of the recent holidays her magic sword, so I'm waving that if that's okay. Um, you know, I think the things that we've already discussed. I think what's so important is around public safety, how we could improve our mix of contracted police so that there's a more efficient use of those resources. So villagers feel, the residents feel that that money that's going there is actually doing what it's supposed to do. And we can talk about that separately. I believe that there are a lot of things we can do. Um, I also believe, thinking about current services, it'll be very interesting. I think hopefully in an upcoming survey, I like Susan's suggestion about maybe having a professional come in. It's been a while since we've done this around, for example, collection of refuse and understanding we have a community that is, quite green. We're the Tree City. And, are there things that we might want to think about frequency? We have a lot of big trucks coming in multiple times a week. So if there is a magic wand, how we could improve that. And, of course, I think this is a very complex one and it gets into the idiosyncrasies that we talk about. But we're talking now the magic wand, right? Is, how when it comes to individual households, when they do have problems with flooding or water management, how could we work very smoothly and in a coordinated way with the county and developers so that we can just really make sure whether it's a completely new development or a refurbishment that we can address connectivity and we could come in and see if we could do anything to really smooth that over that isn't so painful for each one off. That would be my magic wand moment. Thank you. Over to the committee.
Thank you, Jeff. May I turn to Susan, please?
I think I'd like to focus on composting. We already offer it. I would love to see more residents take us up on the offer and start to use it, because with more usage of composting, we could eventually get to a point where we could get to our 1 truck a week on garbage collection, which would make us way greener. And I think that is something to be sought in this era. That's really, I think everything else has been discussed, and I think the big things we're already working on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I turn to Arthur, please?
Yeah, the magic wand image presumes that our current powers are insufficient and that we need some kind of special magic to come in and do it. With that kind of understanding, parking enforcement, as I said before, has been a issue where we don't have the power, we don't have the authority. It's complicated. What do you do about it? So if I had the magic wand, I would say everyone have 4 spaces in their parking in their driveway that is totally permeable and lets the water get through into the subsurface. If we don't have magic wands, then we have the problems that they're just there and are just hard to deal with. I had a friend here who was on the national security staff, and he dealt with North Korea and used to say, North Korea is just hard. And I said, you haven't dealt with parking in Martin's Additions. And I think that we don't need we do need magic sometimes to deal with some of these problems, and they're just not easy answers out there. And so when I tell people, what are you trying to do? There are some easy composting. We can encourage people to do compost. We signed up for, people are doing it. Trees, I think, is the one area in my 32 seconds left that I would push for. The one thing we see is builders come in and they get the bulldozers out, they level the lots. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see that. We don't have laws that restrict that. When we looked into that in the tree committee, it seemed that local laws really weren't all that effective. So we tried to get around it and encourage private planting. But if we could do something to preserve our trees, that would be one area that I would really like to push for, and have the ferry come down and help us. Thank you.
Thank you. So now the ultimate future focus question, what do you think the council can do better in the future? And I would like to start this with Susan, please.
That's a good question. As are they all, not to cast favorites here. I think, I don't know. I give up. I'm sure I think there are times when we could maybe spend a little more time on actual discussions, maybe thinking through issues before we take positions. But I think on balance, we do a pretty good job of really analyzing the pros and cons and applying some measure of reason to all decisions. So I don't really know what else.
Thank you. May I turn to Arthur next, please?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the question means, but I'll answer it anyway. There are things that come across the desk just because they come up, they arise, and we deal with them as they arise. One recent example has already been mentioned, this big bioretention concrete structure that appeared in a new construction to deal with water. We never had to deal with that before, and then we did. Other things we choose to deal with, and there were some things that came up in just in the very last meeting. And I'll put it out here, our 40th anniversary of municipality as incorporated is coming up next year. We made a choice to go out and deal with that. So party committee, get ready for next year. Other things we can choose to deal with. One of the discussions that came up early in the pandemic was people were very concerned about health and safety. Out of that, somebody came up with the idea of running first aid classes for community residents, and we are now looking into that. So we have the opportunity to push things forward, to originate ideas and push them forward. And others just flow across the desk, but because as the Russians say, life happens. So I think given those two things, we just have to sit down and work our way through them and do the analysis and discuss them among ourselves, get resident and specialist and expert feedback, look into the pros and cons. This is kind of what we do for a living here. That's our job. Thank you.
Thank you. And may I turn to Jeff?
I love the question. I do. And, it takes a little bit, I think, of humility to look in the mirror and say, what are the things we perhaps could improve upon? Because, again, I'd like to think that perhaps as an uncontested election, it means that perhaps the village and residents feel things are heading in the right direction. And when you look at the results of the surveys, in general, there's a fairly high satisfaction level, upwards of 70% or more, and how things are being run. But with that said, if you look at some of the things which I look to introduce at the beginning of this fiscal year, where it came to more granular transparency to the village and the residents around the reporting of our finances, I think that's important. But these are tactical. Strategically, I believe, again, something I introduced was an annual calendar look, working with our manager and village staff, in that we could look at the year ahead and really understand the flow of where we may have certain things come up, when we could introduce non-emergency legislation or policy, knowing when we're going to do the annual survey. I think residents, even though they don't have the time to be engaged all the time, we have one of those highly educated resident communities in the country, if not the world. And I believe having an annual calendar, and then I would love to have a forum with our community. I bet we'd have high turnout since we have such high reserves, is talking about where would you like to see the village in 3 or 5 years, and have that kind of discussion. Because in the 4 years I've been on the council, it's been very tactical. It's been a fire here, a fire there. And I think that we could do a bit more. And finally, in the last 10 seconds or less, I would love to see council members have more dialogue in between meetings. I really believe that some of the things that come up in our monthly meetings, that if we had a little bit more administrative discussion, like a half hour a month, that frankly, things would go a bit smoother sometimes, and we wouldn't have some discord that we see. With that,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. So now I'm going to cede to my co-moderator, Naomi.
Thank you. So now it's time for closing statements. So you each have 2 minutes to say what you would like to say, summarize what you've already said, or try to persuade us to vote for you, and or try to persuade us to vote for you. So I will start with Arthur this time.
Yeah, I made a whole number of list of things to talk about, and we've already talked about most of it. I think we need a serious review of our building codes, and with the water committee, we'll be producing some results over the course of the year that will help feed into what we want to do in terms of restricting. And I don't think anyone wants to expand the building code to the maximum. I think we really are talking about restricting the area, restricting the scale of the structures. The walkability is something that was on the liaison to the committee. I really appreciated their findings, and we do want to continue some of the activities that they suggested, particularly curb extensions on the streets as people enter into Martin's Additions, not from Brookville, which would be dangerous coming in from that side, but from the other side. The idea is to make it a little onerous, make it a bit of a burden to get in, to slow people down so that they don't think this is the cut-through street. You have to deliberately slow down, go around a little bit of a minor barrier, and then you're on the village streets. And I think that's an important thing to look for. And I'm looking forward to the 40th anniversary party. So that said, I'll turn it over to the next person.
So Jeff, I will turn to you next for your statement.
Great. And remind me, 2 minutes? Okay, great.
Yes.
Well, first, let me just say again, very briefly, I want to thank the committee for organizing this. I love the forums. What an opportunity. I want to thank my fellow council members who, running as incumbents, and hope if all the stars align, we'll have more years together. We don't always see eye on things, but I think we see and align on most things. And I really enjoy working with them. I've learned an awful lot. And of course, all the residents who are here today tuning in. My litmus tests for running again are, do I believe that I add value? And I certainly believe I do, whether it's from being treasurer or providing more strategic, perhaps thoughts in terms of where we could go as a village, in terms of inviting residents to join in, and also the tactical day-to-day fires and things we have to address. The joy I find in it, and of course my family, number one, and the fact that we hope that we'll be here for many years to come. In terms of what I think are so critical, we've talked about them, but I believe traffic calming is essential. We are just flirting with something that I think is going to be, I hope I'm wrong, but especially on Turner, you know, that turn in from the commercial and that Brookville, I think we could do things with enforcement, the signage, you know, easements with arms coming out. I believe there are things we can do. We don't have to wait for bureaucracy or permission and get it done. The stormwater management, again, sitting down as treasurer not long ago with Gene and Mark, and on behalf of the committee, I believe we have some really important infrastructure projects that we can address. And of course, I think the other pieces of this are really important around the policing, getting more effective value for our money. And, you know, the other things that I put in my statement that others can read, but I believe aging in place is always going to continue to be an issue, and other essential services that will continue to fund. And with that, I'm getting the hook. I'm going to turn it back over to the committee. Thank you.
So, last and not least, Susan.
And I didn't even know there was a hook. Now I find out. Okay, so I have already stated the top priorities I have and that I'm looking forward to seeing movement on in the next term, which are the Brookville sidewalk. And I agree with Arthur, we do need to really do a surgical revision of our building code to address some of the stormwater runoff issues that will only expand over the years. But Arthur mentioned curb extensions, as I had as well. And one thing I'd like to point out, just as sort of a preview to coming attractions, the curb extensions actually offer a great opportunity to channel stormwater by affording plantings in them. Small trees, shrubs, they can take in a lot of water, and they will be a great mechanism for stormwater control. And the reason that they haven't already been implemented is because they need to work in tandem with the stormwater issues that are implemented, the stormwater remedies rather, that are implemented. Aside from that, sign up for compost, please. And have a good evening, everyone. And thank you to the committee again for the forum, and thanks to my fellow council members, those who are participating and those who are just watching on the sidelines. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much for participating, all of you. We have 7 or 8 more minutes. There's one question that came up through chat. And the question was, are we permitted to put in speed cameras? Who would like to take that question? Would you
Yeah, that has come up over and over again. They say, Village of Chevy Chase did it, and why can't we do it? No, we can't do it. There are so many restrictions on doing that that it is infeasible. But anyone else?
I think it's expensive besides.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a revenue sharing arrangement with most of the camera companies, I think, but it's risky and not something that our residents would likely welcome.
The only thing I'll add is I think the suggestion, which is a great one, is a proxy for, I think, what a lot of residents feel is we need to do something, and we need to do something now around traffic calming, and whether it's better enforcement or, as I mentioned, signage or whatever it might be. So I would see this again as a very critical, essential priority, whether it's the remaining time of this council or the new council, of what could we do? We don't need more surveys. We don't need to, you know, go through the bureaucracy. I think it's in our power to do some things that could make a real difference in the near term.
Thank you. I think that is it for the evening. And we did finish 5 minutes early.
Yeah.
So thanks so
Thank you.
much for your cooperation in
Good night,
managing
everyone,
time.
and thank you for the
Good night.
residents here.
Good night.
Thanks all.